her true story from Chicago. My daughter said, "Mom, you're too old-fashioned for my wedding. We need someone younger to handle things." After I planned everything for 2 years, so I quietly stepped back and let her learn what planning really means. The text came at 2:47 a.m. 3 weeks before Sarah's wedding day. I was sitting in my kitchen surrounded by wedding favor boxes I'd been assembling by hand for months, each one tied with silk ribbon, each one holding Jordan almonds wrapped in tulle, a tradition from my own wedding 43 years ago. "Mom, we need to talk. Dave's sister offered to take over the wedding planning. She's really good at this modern stuff, and honestly, your ideas feel a bit outdated. We want something fresh. Hope you understand. We'll handle everything from here." I read it twice. Then I set the phone down and looked at the dining room table. Spreadsheets covered every inch. Guest lists color-coded by family side. Vendor contracts organized in labeled folders. Menu tasting scheduled. Flower arrangements sketched. 2 years of my life mapped out in careful detail. All for this one perfect day I'd dreamed of giving my daughter. I had started planning the moment Sarah got engaged, not because she asked, but because I remembered. I remembered being a young bride with no mother to guide me, no one to hold my hand while choosing flowers or tasting cake. I remembered standing alone in that wedding dress shop, crying because there was no one there to zip me up or tell me I looked beautiful. I didn't want that for Sarah. So I threw myself into every detail. I researched venues until my eyes burned. I called 17 bakeries to find the perfect cake. I drove 3 hours to meet with a photographer whose style matched Sarah's Pinterest boards. I even learned about social media hashtags because I wanted her day to be everything she'd dreamed of. The venue I'd booked? The same garden where James and I had our first date. Sarah used to love hearing that story. I'd negotiated with them for months to get the perfect spring date when the cherry blossoms would be in full bloom. The caterer was my friend Helen's daughter, someone I'd watched grow up, someone I trusted to make everything perfect. But apparently it wasn't modern enough. It wasn't fresh. The next morning I made coffee and sat with James's photo on the kitchen counter. "What would you do?" I whispered to his smiling face. James had always been the practical one. He would have said, "Marilyn, if they think they know better, let them learn." So that's what I did. I canceled nothing. I didn't call vendors to transfer contracts or hand over contact information. When Sarah's future sister-in-law, Jessica, all of 26 years old with a blog about millennial weddings, called asking for the vendor list, I simply said, "I'm sure you have your own preferred people, dear. I wouldn't want to impose my outdated ideas." "But, Mom," Sarah called later, frustration sharp in her voice. "We need the contact information for the florist and the DJ." "Oh, honey," I said gently. "I thought Jessica was handling everything now. I'm sure someone as modern as her has much better connections than old-fashioned me." The silence stretched between us. Finally, Sarah sighed. "Can you just give me the numbers?" "Sarah, sweetheart, you made it very clear that my planning wasn't what you wanted. I respect that. I'm stepping back completely so you can have exactly the wedding you envision." What I didn't tell her was that I'd spent 18 months building relationships with these vendors, that the photographer had given me a family discount because I'd booked him for 3 other weddings in our church, that the florist had agreed to use flowers from my own garden because she knew how much it meant to me, that the venue had waived the setup fee because I'd helped their daughter through her divorce 2 years ago. These weren't just business transactions. They were relationships built on trust, time, and genuine care. You can't just transfer that with a phone number. 3 days later, Sarah called again. This time, she was crying. "Mom, the venue Jessica wanted is booked. She says spring weddings get reserved 2 years in advance. But I thought you could just book places a few months out." I stirred my tea slowly. "I'm sure Jessica will figure something out, dear. She seems very confident in her abilities. And the photographer she found costs twice as much as we budgeted." Mom, can you please just help us? I know what I said was hurtful, but we're running out of time. I set down my cup. Sarah, I spent 2 years planning a wedding that you called outdated. I'm 68 years old, not ancient. I know about Instagram and Pinterest and all those modern things you think I'm too old to understand. But more than that, I know about relationships. I know about taking care of details. I know about loving someone enough to make their day perfect. Silence. The vendors I chose weren't outdated. They were experienced. The venue wasn't old-fashioned. It was meaningful. The flowers I selected weren't behind the times. They were chosen with love, to complement your skin tone and the dress we picked together. More silence. But Jessica convinced you that newer is better, that younger is smarter, that I was just an obstacle to your perfect day. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. But can we please just fix this? I looked at the wedding favor boxes, still sitting in neat rows on my table. Each one perfect. Each one made with hands that have been making things beautiful for 43 years of marriage, 35 years of motherhood, and 6 decades of life. Sarah, I'm gonna ask you to do something that might be hard. I want you to call every vendor and venue you're interested in. I want you to ask them their availability for your date. I want you to ask them their prices. I want you to schedule tastings and meetings and fittings. I want you to do it all yourself. But Mom, because the only way you're going to understand what planning a wedding actually involves is if you do it. Not Jessica. Not me. You. I hung up the phone gently. For the next 2 weeks, I watched from a distance. Sarah called me twice a day, sometimes crying, sometimes angry, always stressed. The venue she'd dreamed of was booked solid until next fall. The caterer Jessica recommended had terrible reviews. The DJ they'd found had double-booked their date. I didn't offer solutions. I didn't say, I told you so. I just listened. Mom, I can't find anyone to do the flowers for under $3,000. That sounds expensive. And the photographer Jessica found? He doesn't even do family portraits. He just takes candid lifestyle shots. Interesting. I don't know what to do. That's when I knew she was ready to hear the truth. Sarah, there's something you need to understand about planning a wedding. It's not about being modern or traditional. It's not about age or trends. It's about love. It's about caring enough to spend 2 years making sure every detail is perfect because you want someone's day to be magical. I paused, letting that sink in. The vendors I chose weren't picked from Google searches or Instagram ads. They were chosen because I met with them, talked to them, built relationships with them. I knew their work personally. I knew I could trust them with something precious. I know, Mom. I know that now. The venue wasn't just a pretty space. It was where your father and I fell in love. I thought you'd want to start your marriage in a place that had already seen love succeed. She was crying now. And the flowers from my garden? They weren't old-fashioned. They were grown with the same hands that held you as a baby, that braided your hair for school, that taught you to make cookies and fold laundry and balance a checkbook. I'm so sorry. Mom, I was such an idiot. You weren't an idiot. You were young. There's a difference. But youth doesn't automatically equal wisdom, and age doesn't automatically equal irrelevance. The next morning, Sarah came to my house, not to ask for vendor numbers or to beg me to fix everything. She came to apologize properly. Mom, I need you to know something. I didn't just hurt your feelings. I threw away 2 years of love. I dismissed experience and wisdom because I thought newer was better. I let someone convince me that your way of doing things wasn't good enough for my special day. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd spent countless hours planning her wedding. But here's what I learned. There is no substitute for someone who loves you. There's no replacement for experience. There's no app or website or young person who can care about my wedding the way you do. I reached across and took her hand. The truth is, Mom, I don't want a modern wedding planned by someone who barely knows me. I want a wedding planned by someone who's loved me for 32 years. I want flowers grown by hands that have been gardening since before I was born. I want vendors who respect you and will take care of me because they care about you. That afternoon, we called my vendors together. Every single one was still available for her date. Why? Because they'd been holding the spots, waiting to hear from me. They knew that real planning takes time. And they knew that I wasn't the kind of person who walked away from commitments. The florist, Margaret, laughed when I explained what had happened. "Marilyn, I've been doing weddings for 30 years. I've seen this before. The young ones think they can plan a wedding in 3 weeks with Pinterest and attitude. Then they come crying back when they realize it takes experience, not enthusiasm." The photographer, David, was even more direct. "Mrs. Thompson, I've been waiting for your call. When someone else reached out asking about Sarah's date, I told them I was already booked. Some clients you hold space for." By the end of the day, Sarah's wedding was back on track. But more than that, Sarah had learned something about respect, about wisdom, and about the value of experience. The wedding day was perfect. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom, exactly as I'd planned. The flowers from my garden complemented her dress flawlessly. The photographer captured moments that told the story of not just a wedding, but of a family. The caterer served food that had every guest asking for recipes. And Jessica, she posted Instagram stories all day with captions like, "So blessed to be part of this perfect day," taking credit for a wedding she'd had nothing to do with creating. But I didn't mind, because Sarah knew the truth. And at the end of the night, when the last guest had left and the vendors had packed up, Sarah came to me with tears in her eyes. "Mom, this was the most beautiful day of my life, and it wouldn't have been possible without you, not because of your vendors or your planning, but because of your love, because you cared enough to do it right, even when I didn't appreciate it." She hugged me tight, her wedding dress rustling against my mother of the bride outfit that I'd chosen 18 months ago. "I hope when I'm your age, I'll be half as wise as you are." I smiled and held her close. "Wisdom isn't about age, sweetheart. It's about loving someone enough to do the hard work, even when they don't see its value yet." 3 months later, I got a card in the mail. Inside was a photo from the wedding. Sarah and Dave cutting the cake, surrounded by flowers from my garden, under lights strung by vendors who'd known me for years, captured by a photographer who'd waited for my call. On the back, Sarah had written, "Mom, thank you for teaching me that experience isn't outdated. It's priceless. Love, your grateful daughter." I placed it next to James's photo on the kitchen counter. He would have been so proud, because sometimes the most modern thing you can do is trust someone who's been doing things right for decades. Sometimes wisdom doesn't need updating. It just needs respect. And sometimes the best wedding planner isn't the youngest or the trendiest. It's the one who loves you enough to spend 2 years making sure your day is perfect, and patient enough to let you learn that lesson yourself. If this story reminded you of a time when your experience was dismissed, when your wisdom was called outdated, when someone younger thought they knew better, then you understand. This is Grandma True Stories, where experience speaks louder than trends, where wisdom wins over youth, and where love always proves its worth in the end. We share the stories of women who've been underestimated, overlooked, and undervalued, only to prove that there's no substitute for genuine care and years of experience. If you believe that wisdom doesn't have an expiration date, that experience matters more than trends, and that sometimes the old way is the right way. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories today, because when a grandmother speaks from experience, the world learns to listen.